everyone. I think I'll introduce myself. I'm Lien Tran. I'm a professor in the School of Design. I primarily teach in game design, also in kind of user experience, and my area is kind of in the social impact design space of interactive experiences. And today I'll be the moderator with our great panelists.
Hi, Josh Tsui, recovered game designer and filmmaker, and currently the Director of Innovation here at DePaul.
I'm Eugene Jarvis. I guess I was in the movie here.
All right, so yes. So thank you, Josh, for this amazing film and for chronicling the history of coin-op here in Chicago and the great work of Midway and all the kind of people involved with that. So I just want to get started. I believe we have some kind of younger people in the audience who maybe didn't get to witness, the evolution of coin-op from the 80s into the 90s. And so you can maybe help paint the picture of the landscape of how that all came to be, who was working on games, what kind of, how did things evolve? I mean, we obviously got a taste of that throughout the documentary, but I'm kind of curious, in retrospect, how do you kind of see that?
It was a very different time. There was no, video game design schools, or I don't think any legitimate university would have a program in animation and gore. But
I majored in gore. Yes.
So it was very kind of bottom up and just a bunch of young kids exploring a new medium, and just kind of we found this digitization thing, and wow, just kind of ran with that, and to really for the first time to move video games from little cartoon characters, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, Mario, to bring it into real life, to have live action, have all the emotion of live action actors and real backgrounds and realism. And so it was just really exciting.
Yeah, and people came from all over the place. Like you said, unlike now, there was no game school back then. I mean, back then, even film school was considered new and such. And so, I came from a film school background, so I didn't study video games. I knew a little bit about computer graphics, but for me, it was interesting timing because, I was learning how to digitize video back in the day on the Amiga. So I'm dating myself. And so I kind of got into video games kind of by accident. But again, it was much harder for people to get into video games back in the day, just because there were no game engines. You guys made everything from scratch. I mean, you really had to know, low-level programming. And that was really tough.
Yeah, it was extremely primitive. This was even before there was Windows, and there was no Adobe Photoshop. There was no Maya, no animation programs. You just basically you wrote the operating system and the program and the animation, and it was all kind of bottom up, seat of the pants, just make it happen. And if it didn't happen on Saturday, you worked Sunday, and if it didn't happen Sunday, you worked another 7 or 8 days straight. It was just you had to make things happen.
Right. So thinking about kind of fly by the seat of your pants approach, like what are some of the, if you can kind of recall, summarize like the approaches that you did, some examples of that, and where maybe the bigger successes were, maybe even some of the failures, right? Because I think as a game designer and a designer beyond just games, like there is failure in that process and that you learn from that. So I want to speak to that. Yeah,
well, there was certainly, and some of those early scenes were, say, getting the treadmill going, getting people and I mean, obviously we started out just say to walk across the room, and we'll film that, but then like the perspective is changing. They're getting
a lot of trial and error.
They're getting further and closer to the camera. Their size starts changing. You realize very quickly that that's not going to cut it, because as you need to get an animation loop. And the loop, the people are shrinking and expanding, and so that was a big lesson. Like, how do you keep them in the same spot? And then, it's kind of like treadmills, And then lighting was like this huge problem because, I mean, being, just kids that didn't know anything about movies, or you'd have a spotlight or something, and
Oh yeah, a lot of the early games. I mean, you were using desk lamps to light the actors, just whatever was around. So when they talk about going to Target or whatever the equivalent of Target was back in the day, it was literally just consumer equipment.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, just again, kind of hacking a treadmill, right?
Yeah.
And just whatever lighting you can find, and just trying to like make it work, right? And again, I guess there's a lot of trial and error with that because it isn't optimized or designed for these use cases.
Yeah,
so it's really interesting.
the video technology also was pretty flaky and very low res, and it was interesting because when we were filming Narc, it was like, well, what's really cool? Well, bad guys, they should be wearing black leather and kind of dress up kind of bad and dark, and and then you shoot that and it's like there's nothing there. It's just black,
It's mud.
And it's just like this is this is not working. So we actually, I remember one thing we did to like fake some kind of lighting. We actually people would have like black jeans on or dark blue, and then we'd actually throw flour on it was kind of like an early stonewashing technique. But we just throw flour like on the front of your jeans, and then that would give a depth, to the you'd see the lighter areas, and those would pop forward. So it was tough to kind of try to get the 3D-ness, and not have the image just get completely pancakey flat. And so you have to use the lighting to relay that three-dimensional character.
Right. So for those who are, this is a cinematic arts program, to think about, the ways that things were done, very analog style, and today you do it in post potentially.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, with the technology now. Stuff that would take us months to do would be done in an hour, and just so, to talk about things that were handmade. We didn't have Photoshop back in the day. Like Photoshop didn't exist. So all those in the film, you see a lot of these art tools, and it's a person writing those tools for us as we're asking for them. So it was literally everything was made from scratch.
Yeah.
One thing that was amazing was John Tobias, the artist behind Smash TV and also Mortal Kombat. When we were doing Smash TV, again, no Photoshop. All we had is a tool that would put pixels one by one in
so all those animations.
In a thing. So those
pixel by pixel.
By pixel by pixel. So those, like that giant boss monster, he made that pixel by pixel, and he'd actually, because we had I think 16 rotations of that thing. He had to. And there was no way to produce the rotations other than just, again, in his head, he'd have to 3D project it in his mind and put the pixels out. It was all, in 2D. Yep. And just visualize the 3D-ness in his mind. And it's amazing what he came up with. Just sheer human.
We still have PTSD over those days. So.
I bet. You should be feel so lucky to be in 21st century of technology and film and games.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about. Does that speak to also then figuring out this kind of modular system? So there was the technique of swapping out weapons, right? So then that was why it led to this, right? The body and the head being separated, because otherwise it'd be a lot more pixels to have to hang.
Right. So we just to and it's funny what differentiates games from film is that game has multiple branching points, or almost infinite branching points, and so you need to have all angles of everything. You need to have all perspectives. Film, you just get this is the root, and you capture it, and it's beautiful. But you get this data explosion. Especially if you want to, decapitate the guy, and now we need to have all these images without a head on. And so you get into that modular thing where you split the head on, and you find out, okay, I can just flip the thing, I can do left and right by just flipping the image.
Yes.
So then
shortcuts, yes.
Right. Then half the work is done,
For sure.
And then of course, like in NBA Jam, and it also just, be able to control skin tone. So we could just take one actor, and then he could be, black, he could be Asian or white or whatever.
That was the only Asian character in NBA Jam.
Yeah.
That was me.
Yeah. I don't know if you all caught any of those Easter eggs, but Josh is not outrightly in the doc, so I don't want to speak to that at all. You don't have to adjust that, but
As we were talking, it's the question was, because I was working at Midway in that area, but I purposely didn't put myself in the doc because I just didn't. It just seems kind of weird to put yourself in a documentary, but I had to sneak myself in somehow. So a lot of the gameplay footage, it's my characters that are in the game. So NBA Jam, Mortal Kombat, and this kind of speaks to the complete lack of diversity of game development back then. Not just Midway, but just 90s game development was that I was literally the only Asian in the whole building. And so anytime they needed an Asian character, it would be my face. Yeah. So it's so in some weird ways I benefited from the lack of diversity by being in these games. But it was it was very very different times back then.
Yeah. I remember we had I guess our first female artist was an Asian woman, and she did a lot of the work on Smash TV, yep. And then she she really wasn't into the whole violence thing that much. And one day she, was asking me, she said, well, I have an idea for a game, that I think would be really cool, and I go, oh, okay, well, what would that be? And she said, well, I want to have a game, I'm not into violence and these side of things. I want to have something, I want to nurture things. I want a game about growing plants and, growing flowers or crops or whatever. And I'm going, and I just go, no one's ever going to play that, That's ridiculous. It'll be so slow and boring to be like watching paint dry. And then, of course, 20, 30 years later, the game Farmville came out and just blew up the universe. So, I unfortunately set back Farmville 30 years, I think.
Midway would still be around if he had just listened.
So we didn't see many people, of women contributing to the design or development of the game. Had at least Sonia, the actor, playing Sonia, but you mentioned this artist. So what was it like? What brought this artist in? Was this the only?
I think it was just.
Kind of curious how that all kind of played out.
I think she just applied, and in those days.
She's brave.
In those days it was just. It was almost like whoever came in the door, but obviously we're kind of in this pretty non-diverse environment, So I think we're not really reaching out to other cultures and things, and B, it was kind of more of kind of a locker room misogynistic kind of situation. I think in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just back then, just the access to technology, access to be able to. I mean, it's going back to everything being made from scratch. Technology was really tough back then, and you'd have to, and getting a incredible computer science education degree. Many people back then didn't have access to it, and that just ends up trickling down all over the place. So you see that back during those days. Obviously it's gotten better. It could be much better. I mean, the game industry in general is still pretty bad with that, and it's well documented about that. Yeah, but it's with access to technology, more access to technology, and now with game engines that anybody, you can get, learn Unreal for free now and stuff, and so that really opens the door to so many more people. So that's why you're seeing, much better games than back in the day. I mean, we've never had any illusion that it wasn't a tough period back then.
Right. Yeah, I mean, speaking to that access, or even just like the representation, or feeling like you belong, right? Yeah. Well, I'm younger than these two, but I did, but I'm older than a lot of you in the room, and I minored in computer science. I remember looking around, just being like, there's like two other women in the room. But we were more consistent about attending. So I will just say we were much more, much more consistent. But you just didn't feel like that was the space to be in at the time.
Yeah, and it's certainly like the grittiness of the factory environment, everything. I mean, the few women that we did interview, with I remember in the vending machines, there was no candy on the first 3 levels because the rats would eat the candy, and so it was
good times.
Yeah, it was
Trust me, when I started, I was intimidated when I the first month I was there. So,
but it just seemed like the bathrooms were horrific. It just wasn't very welcoming.
So it was a frat house.
Exactly.
A 90s frat house, like Animal House.
Yeah.
Okay, I can picture that. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if that would be my first choice.
Yeah. We weren't.
Experience.
Sometimes no air conditioning. Actually, the worst thing that would happen. Williams had it was an old factory. It was on the Chicago River. I guess very near to Lane Tech, across the river from Lane Tech. But there was this thing called Deep Tunnel, which was it's like the sewer overflow. And so there was this giant deep tunnel vent that was right across the river from Williams. And if the wind was blowing in the right direction, and the whole place would fill up with
the
sewage gas. And in fact, there was a couple times we had to evacuate the building.
Many times. We'd be out in the rain. Yeah, good times.
Beans that did not make it. I don't know why these aren't in the documentary.
Oh no, it could go. I mean, the documentary. It could have been if I put all the details of all the crazy, it would be like a Netflix series.
Yes. There's an idea. You could create a series that is kind of like a throwback to those times. I did want to speak to something that you already started kind of touching upon, but basically this relationship between games and film, really being a dance and this influence that goes back and forth, right? So as we saw in the documentary, Mortal Kombat as a video game, right, led to a film adaptation. And now we're seeing it happening again now with The Last of Us as being a very popular game. So I don't know if you want to speak to especially your relationship, you having started out studying film, but then very quickly being in games for decades and eventually making this film.
Yeah, I think, to talk about, there's film and video game. There's always been that dance. I mean, there was a Mario Brothers movie back in the day and things like that. And, the ones that are the most successful are based off of games that were story driven to begin with. So The Last of Us is fantastic, but anybody who's played The Last of Us knows that it's an incredible story experience and not just a video game. So those match up really well. And a lot of people forget that even though Mortal Kombat was an arcade game with very minimal story, the way John Tobias created the storyline. He used to be a comic book artist back in the day. So back in the day, he was the artist for the Ghostbusters, comic book and things. So he was always very story driven in his approach. So even though it's a fighting game and there's not much story with two people punching each other's faces off or something, but there were little interstitials where he really wanted to flesh out the storylines of these characters. And we talked a bit about that in the film. And so when they made the Mortal Kombat game, the director and producer really understood what made people like Mortal Kombat. Yes, the fighting part was great, but there was a lore that was very well written out. And just like with filmmaking, people write these story bibles, and that's what John did. And so they had that as a reference, and that's why that first Mortal Kombat movie back in '95, I think, was so successful, because they understood what the fans wanted, and they respected the source material, and they didn't try to make it anything else except for about that story. They didn't try to go too deep on anything. But again, Last of Us is another great example of it. A lot of these video games to movies adaptations fail because most of the time the people who are making the film don't really have any idea about the games, and they've never even played the games before. So that's how that's worked out.
Yeah, not every game is suited for
and that's
adaptation.
The thing. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's the producer of the Mortal Kombat movie, Larry Kasanoff, highly successful producer, worked with James Cameron back in the day. Ever since Mortal Kombat, he went out and bought the rights to a bunch of different game IPs, and he's trying to make a game about a movie about Tetris. It's like, what are you going to do with that? Or there was that there was a movie based on Battleship, which is just ridiculous. So you can't just go off and go nuts with it.
yeah, we kind of spoke this a little bit, but as a educator of games, like I talk about a big part of games is abstraction. So like we have the real world, right? A lot of games are simulations of the real world, or they are simplifications of reality, right? Because otherwise you would be experiencing the real thing. And so it's interesting to think also about how, in a way, film has had to adapt the play experience, like kind of what you were speaking to, Eugene, earlier, which is in games you have choices, right? So the player, as designers, we create the space for what players, the choice and the directions that players can take the play experience, but we don't dictate, step by step what they do. And so with film, though, we have to almost adapt that and abstract it into a linear and single path, which I think is interesting. So I don't know if you want to kind of speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and that's one reason. You think about, like, if you can do anything, a lot of things you do are really dumb. They may not enhance the story. Like I could like just walk and slip and break my leg on the floor here, and I don't know if it would enhance our talk tonight. But it's
We get a good laugh.
We won't try it.
But it's so you have all these things, and like a movie, you're selecting out what makes sense and what amplifies the story. It's not just every random possible. And video games, I mean, you look at Mortal Kombat. Yes, there's a lot of permutations, a lot of choice you can make, but you're stuck on you're on a line, you're fighting, you're in this ring, you're in the environment. So it seems like the video games kind of take a certain cinematic approach, but then they kind of neck down the possibilities. And you're not everything. You're in a ring fighting, or you're not, and you create this some kind of a universe that. And sometimes it's directed, like I'm sure in The Last of Us, and you have these branching points, but a lot of times they kind of come back together, and to get rid of that combinatorial, expansion to infinity, which we would never finish anything. But yeah, it's but I think it's it's always been a dream of video game people to be like interactive cinematography, to have that kind of dream, and the early games, you're dealing with like very strong emotions. Mortal Kombat probably is a great example of that.
Yeah, keeps strong
where
emotions.
It's like your survival instinct is your strongest instinct, and so just dealing with life and death is obviously the most important thing to a human being or any organism, is living or dying. And so that's kind of, you get interested, like, oh, I'm going to die. I'm it motivates you. And so it's a very strong emotion to, if you're sitting there like, that guy just ripped my head off, like, I'm going to kill him. So you're dealing with strong emotions, and the early games, because of the primitive graphics and the, kind of the basic mechanics, a lot of them depended on survival instinct. But what's kind of amazing now is with the maturation of the technology and obviously a lot of artists working with the medium are, exploring, much more different in material and other, human emotions, like say crying or laughing is maybe, and sadness, or, just you're getting more into the depth of human emotions and more subtle emotions. And I think that's where a game like The Last of Us is showing how far video games have gone.
Right, because that emotional component maybe is a little bit harder, would have been harder to do back in
we just couldn't, we didn't have the bits really to show subtle emotions. It had to be,
everything had to be over the top to break through.
Head or no head.
It was that 2015 Mortal Kombat,
oh my God,
it's fantastic.
Just seeping out of the head.
Oh yeah, you should see.
I felt something there.
You should see Mortal Kombat 11. It's oh my God, it's kind of surgical.
So, Josh, I would love to hear about kind of your journey in making this film. Like, where did the idea come from? How did you approach the writing of it, and even sourcing a lot of this content? You have some amazing stock footage, and the way you kind of position them with the game with the actors or the speakers.
Yeah, I mean so the idea of the project kind of first came up when back in 2012, Polygon, this a gaming website, they were very gracious to do a kind of a career retrospective on myself, which is like kind of weird. But they wanted to write an article about my career in games. I think at that point I was on my 20th year or something like that. So I did this long interview, and when I was dropping all kinds of facts about Midway Games, because that was obviously a very key point in my career. And the writer, he was just like, wait, I didn't know this game was made by these people, and all these gigantic billion-dollar franchise games came out of this weird space in the back of a pinball factory. So
the vending machines and
the vending machine rats and everything. Yeah. So when I was told the story, even as I was telling it, I realized like, wow, that's kind of messed up. This is an interesting story. And so afterwards, it just kind of it kind of stayed on my mind. And so I didn't do anything with it for a while, but I kept thinking about it. And then around 2015, I was getting so burnt out on working on video games. I really needed to do a side project. And so what I did was, I just decided I'm going to start small with this, and maybe I'll just shoot a few little interviews here and there. So I interviewed Eugene and George and some other people, and they were just very short interviews, and just to see how it felt like to do something like this. So I got that together. Turned out pretty well. So I put together a trailer and decided I'm going to do a Kickstarter for this. Partly to fund it, which obviously, but really a lot of it was just to find out if the idea has legs. Like, I'm obviously interested in it, but I'm very biased. But I thought, what, if I use Kickstarter to see if there's a demand for it, then that'll kind of, kick me in the ass to actually do it. Mm-hmm. And so I did this Kickstarter in 2015, did wildly well, and which so much to my shock. So then I was committed to do it at that point. And luckily over the years, I had been very, in close contact with everybody that I used to work with, and luckily they didn't hate me, so it was okay.
Don't burn those bridges.
Don't burn bridges. Yeah,
you
trust
might
me.
Need them.
Yeah, and so I really just took my time with it, and I really started in 2016, and then they eventually finished in 2019. But I was amazed just the access that I had, so obviously, people such as Eugene and Jordan stuff, but even like the CEO of Midway, he's quite the character, and we're always living in fear of him. And I was shocked that he agreed to do an interview. He has never done an interview on any of this stuff before. And so he just said, I'll give you a couple of hours, show up at my beautiful palatial estate on Lakeshore Drive and stuff, as I went and filmed them. And, it was amazing how frank he was about everything. And, when he talks about leashing his legal dogs on people, that's just one instance. A side story that a lot of people don't realize was that when me and John Tobias left Midway to form our own company, we literally didn't work for a year because of this clause. And Neil knew that, and so when he was telling me the story, he knew he was like I was one of those people, So, but he knew, I really appreciated how frank he was about things. So I was like super grateful for all this access. Ken Fidesna, after Midway went bankrupt, Ken Fidesna took all of the archival tapes that were at Midway and stored it in his office. Wow. And he just asked, and I found out about this, so I just asked him like, can I get access to this? And so I spent months at his office digitizing tapes, and just I digitized every single tape he had before he donated it to the Strong Museum. And I got super lucky. Like I had people, because of the Kickstarter, there was a lot of publicity about the film, and so I had people coming out of the woodwork saying, "Hey, I have this tape," or I worked in San Diego doing the home version of Mortal Kombat. We have these files, and so I got super lucky. There was, one piece of footage of Eugene with cruising, and that was just somebody from a game magazine who sent that to me. And I looked through this file, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff in there. Yeah. So it was just a lot of synchronicity, as I was getting, as I was doing that.
Great. So Eugene, I wanted to ask about, you have this, long journey and definitely a commitment to coin-op and location-based experiences. Right. You've gone on and started many new companies, but I'd love to kind of hear about your kind of journey from, Williams and then Midway and then leaving and coming back and like kind of tell us about that. Like what kind of drove you to each of those kind of, not each of them, but like some of those decisions and
yeah, I guess, I just loved to, it was a very kind of a pioneering time in video games, and things were, technology was moving rapidly, and it's interesting. There's kind of a technology kind of drives video games, and video games drive technology. It's kind of and then a lot of things in this whole digitization thing, which made possible Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, Terminator 2, all these interesting, great games. That technology, if we weren't doing that technology, none of this stuff would have happened. It couldn't have worked. And so I was just kind of, I just wanted to explore the medium and try to get on, it's kind of like surfing what I thought was the next big thing, because I felt like for my first game, Defender, we kind of did scrolling, and we did like the first particle effects and stuff. And just like every game, I like, what is going to be the cool new thing that I do, and I want to just I want to have a game that was as big as Defender, which unfortunately was my best game and biggest game. And I've been working, 40 odd years trying to beat it. And I've yet to get better than my first game, but I'm still here, and
we're here at the Jarvis College of Computing and Digital Media, so I guess you did okay.
But so I wanted to, look at, see where that intersection of gameplay and technology and, and kind of bringing more cinema into video games and where it would lead me. And so it, led me to the digitization and that string of games from NARC all the way to NBA Jam and Blitz and so forth. And then it was the 3D texture mapping, which started out with, cruising games. And, obviously there were competitors. Sega had their Daytona game, which was about at the same time. And so that became, within a few years, that became very well developed. And then, okay, what's the next thing after that, And I guess and I have this dream, and I don't think we've hit it yet, but we do. Obviously, current technology, we do a lot of motion capture, and I love that commercial on TV with the balls and stuff. I don't know if you see that. You probably don't watch TV. Anyway.
I mean, I stream content. Does that count?
That's right. Yeah, streaming. Okay.
I used to watch TV. I did. Yeah. You all probably haven't even had to watch TV.
Exactly.
You all just stream everything, but yeah.
Right.
So the ball. Remind me the.
Yeah, the balls, which the optical balls.
Oh, you're talking about the actual. Yeah. No, I know the balls. I've had ball. Yes, I've been in those.
Motion capture.
Yes.
And
I thought you meant like the end product. Yes.
And it's kind of get that 3D motion, 3D geometry, and then you throw on the, you rig the model, and you throw on the textures, and I still think it would be so cool if we could do a completely live take of 3D performances, where it's just the actors with, I don't know, a zillion cameras or something, and they just do their thing. We don't have to go and rig models and and do all this post.
It's getting close.
Posting and just a real time kind of like we did with Mortal Kombat. We just run you run around and you're there and so to me, I don't think we're quite there yet, but and obviously a new technology that's been emerging actually since 1968, virtual reality. It's always like
slow burn.
It's been like it'll be really cool 10 years from now, but actually there's some really great work taking place in virtual reality right now, and just to get that the immersion you get in those experiences is just incredible, and obviously that's a big future thing, bringing games into virtual reality, and So there's always, it seems like the tech is driving the medium and the medium is driving the tech.
Yes, for sure. And I think it's that you have an entrepreneurial spirit, we have a curiosity that, what can we do with what is available? How do we, again, going back to how do we hack like the treadmill and the lighting to then evolutions in the technology and be like, okay, now what can I do with this? So I think that kind of speaks to, I think that's a big part of, it sounds like that's a big part of your journey.
Yeah, and so we did our
you, right?
our first virtual reality game at Raw Thrills, my current studio, I guess about 3 years ago, and actually it's pretty amazing. It's called King Kong of Skull Island, and trying to get, one cool thing in virtual reality is just to be able to see like huge things, you just, you cannot capture the hugeness in a small screen, and to like something like King Kong where, this giant ape, and he's, just you get the feeling of scale and giganticness, and kind of, when you walk in downtown Chicago and you look at these buildings, like, oh my God, it's that feeling of awe, which only, virtual reality can give you that kind of presence, and your screen is the entire world rather than a screen. Yeah,
for sure. I feel like I'm plugging someone else's product, but if you ever have a chance, try to go to the Illinois Holocaust Museum. There is this VR experience, The Journey Back, and I just did it recently, and it kind of in a different way. It's not an entertainment experience, and you're really reliving, kind of tragic history, but going to visit Auschwitz, and they do have drone footage, and they take you to the barracks, and they even kind of do renderings of what it was like. They packed in the people into the barracks. So I think for me, there's also a great emotional impact in VR, even from a kind of a social justice or historical context too. So that's where I come from it. So I see the power of VR for entertainment. I've done really fun, Beat Sabers and the like, but also it's also being used in those ways too for storytelling.
Certainly, to really have you feeling the sense of place and really being there and try to, and evoking the emotions of the experience.
Yeah, great. So I think we are nearing time for questions, but I don't know if there's any last things you want to share with the audience.
No, I mean it's it's been amazing to screen the film for an audience because when this film came out, that pandemic came out at the same time. So this is between this and some of the other theatrical showings. It's so weird seeing it with other people because they're so used to seeing it at home and such. So it's been it's a great opportunity to have that here.
Yeah, it's amazing how the humor comes through, Josh. And, and the editing and the way you flip back and forth between people, almost like having conversations, and
it helps interview completely psychotic people. Yeah. So that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel fortunate that we all are here to have this kind of screening and to have both of you present to talk about it. And again, in this college and taking us on that journey to the present time. Yeah. So I think with that, we can start with questions. Okay. So I think, very well lit microphone over there is if you have a question, feel free to form a line.
Oh, there you go.
And go forth.
I hear stumbling out there.
Man, you can't see anything here. It's brilliant, blinding stage lights.
Throughout your careers, I imagine you all have battled this a couple times, maybe. Can you just talk about dealing with burnout, or I imagine also going through building something from the ground up, you're slamming your head against your desk. How do you guys deal with that?
I'm still burnt out. But it's kind of interesting. It's hard to talk about burnout without getting too crazy and stuff. But I'll tell you, when I working at Midway, the work-life balance was like non-existent, and a lot it wasn't necessarily mandated from from like management or anything like that. It was really because we were left alone with no management. That also meant that that we can self-manage ourselves. And so I can't speak for Eugene, but it's the crunch that I went through. To this day, I think I'm still scarred by it. To be quite honest with you, we would do crunch for months on end. I wouldn't be home, I would come home for maybe 4 hours a day and things like that. And it was kind of self-imposed. And because I was so young at the time, I just really couldn't control myself on it. And that has been at multiple studios, to be honest with you. And the first time I worked at a company where there was no crunch, I couldn't get used to it, and that's how scarring, that can be. So for the longest time, I think I was in perpetual burnout mode, in all honesty. So, but everyone goes through it a little bit differently, but I would definitely say that, it's, if you have bad management, you'll get crunch and burnout. If you have no management, you have crunch and burnout. So the key thing is, really being aware of who you're working with and who you're working for. And not, when I say with, that means your fellow teammates. Everyone should be kind of on the same page. Nobody, if you have somebody who thinks that they're a hero, you're in big trouble. Those are the type of people that are gonna kill you in the end.
Yeah, it's, I guess it probably applies to a lot of art forms, writing a book or actors. You're doing this is your dream. You have such passion. You want to make your impact on the world, and you end up, and one of the few dials you have is I can just work, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, and I can get it done quicker, and because there's always lack of resources, lack of time, and so forth, and so you can really push yourself to the point of and you think you're productive, but that 14th hour, did you really do anything? And especially if you're a programmer, I remember anything you write after midnight is like garbage. It's you're just
diminishing returns.
You're destroying your it's going to take you 2 days to debug the crap that you wrote after working 12 hours and so I think you kind of have to bring yourself back and realize that you've turned the volume to 11 and all you're getting is static, and that's the thing. But I remember how it would affect me personally. I'd start getting psychosomatic pain. I'd get just because of tension, and you get different parts of your body you obsess with, and they start hurting, and then your mind starts actually making things hurt more, and it gets very. You don't know if it's a real pain or not or whatever. But then when you go on vacation for a week, all your pain goes away, and you could just get. I remember I was getting this tension in my chest. I was convinced I was going to die of a heart attack. And I was just I had so much tension that the muscle was causing pain, and so I went to all these doctors, and finally I went to this cardiac guy, and I had to wait 2 months to get an appointment with him. And I went there, and he listened to my story, and he said, you know what, you need a psychologist. And I was super pissed. What? You're telling me this isn't real? You're telling me this is bullshit? I was so offended. And then the next day I was cured. It's
you didn't even need to go to therapy?
No, I didn't. I just the next day I was
just need to know.
Because I go, I can't be crazy. I guess I'm not hurting.
Right.
I mean, it was weird. It was just to tell me I was full of shit. That was the therapy.
Right.
And
so you actually did get therapy. You just
You did,
have to go to
It's very quick.
It was just
very
dual
efficient.
purpose.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, but I think, but no, you really, so you get this illusion of productivity, but it really isn't, and it can be very counterproductive.
Yeah. So avoid crunch, and that might be, hopefully, if you have self-management, impose that on yourself, or hopefully pick people that understand that you have to avoid crunch. Take breaks, and I also find too that I have epiphanies and when I'm doing something completely unrelated. So take that time for yourself.
Broaden your horizons.
That's huge, because you need to get different perspectives, and you're you have your blinders on. You're almost like one of those horses on Michigan Avenue, and you're just looking straight ahead at the asphalt, and that's your world, and you don't realize man, there's green pastures over here or something else, and you're going down a route and you need to. It's really great to network with people and try to get different perspectives, and ask people for help. Like or Google.
You'd be amazed how much people, you just ask them like, what do you think, or could you help me out, and people will help you.
Yeah.
So, all right, hello.
Hi. So I was just wondering, like, what's the mindset change from just playing video games in an arcade and like changing your mindset to like, oh, I want to go make some video games. Like, what kind of changes in your head?
That's a great question. Thank you.
I guess as a player, you play these games and you're playing Mortal Kombat or something. And you go, man, this guy this character, that move was cheated. That was a bad. That move should have been illegal. The game should have been this. If you start getting ideas of how to do a game better, what you would have done, and a lot of times when you're playing, it's just natural to get these ideas. Like, well, if it was my game, I mean, they wouldn't rip out spinal cords. I mean, they'd get them counseling. And so you start thinking about that, and then you at some point you make a transition to trying to make your own games because you feel like your perspective is valid and it needs to get out there.
Yeah. If you don't see it, right, make it, I guess. Yeah.
For me, it's the transition from going from player to creator was very nonlinear in nature. I was a big arcade kid, when I was younger, but I just didn't think that I would ever get into games. And it's weird when I got into games because I remember I always loved games, but I didn't realize that people actually made games. It just didn't dawn on me that human beings made games, And so when I found out that Midway was in Chicago and I was just graduating from Columbia College, it kind of blew my mind because a friend of mine got a job there. And so when I went in to make games, it was still with a filmmaker's mentality because I came in to work on video on games, and then I slowly started getting into game design from there. So it was like a long progression. It was never in my plan, so it just kind of seeped in without me knowing it.
Similarly, I also didn't think I was going to make games, but it is just so surprising today that people are like, oh, people make games, or like, you make games, how does that work? Like, people have no idea, they think it's magic. So I don't know.
People think software is made by software,
Truly, yeah.
Hi, so before I ask my question, I just want to thank you guys for all the work that you've done. I don't think the industry, video games, whatever, even the technology would be where it's at today if it weren't for the work that you guys have done. I can't imagine, doing the stuff that you guys do today without internet. Like, that just blows my mind. Like, splicing, like all the analog work and oh my gosh, like the amount of technology and the legwork to get from point 0 to point 1 is like amazing. So just want to thank you guys. But my question is, knowing what you guys know now, would you do it again? And then if you could go back in time, what would be one advice you would give to your younger self? Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Which part, for me, I'm not sure which part I would go back and do again, going into games or making the film. So I'll speak, because you'll speak to games, I'll speak to film. Is like, yeah, I'll absolutely would do it again, probably just in a smarter way. It's, I did, many production-wise made the classic rookie mistakes one does, when making a film. But yeah, absolutely, would do it again. And, it's hoping to do another one, pretty soon and just kind of keep building off of, what I've learned on the first one. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's, it's always a tough question. Like, would you have done it different? And I guess a lot of times things, when you're working on a game project, you have a vision of what it's going to become. And I guess most of the time, it never quite lives up to your dream is never, you never get 100% of your dream. You get 90, 80, 70, minus 20. So you think about, obviously it's amazing. I would guess probably the biggest advice I would give myself was I just wanted to do everything myself. You know, it was like, and it was kind of that kind of an era where my early games, I'd have to do the artwork and the sounds and the program, and now obviously we have lots of specialties and, you know, amazing teams. But, you know, there's always that tendency like, oh man, you know, your code sucks, man. Let me write your code, you know, like, and you can't do everybody's work. You know, you can't, you have to work with other people and listen to other people and get the most of everyone. And it seems like the projects that were the most amazing that I worked on were when I had, you know, collaborating partners, and they would do like stuff, much more amazing stuff than I could ever have conceived of, you know. And it wasn't like, oh, I only got 90% or 70%. It was like, oh my God, look at this thing. Like when I was doing Defender, and my co-programmer Sam Dicker, he came up with this particle effect to blow up the characters, and it was just like, I mean, once we got that running, I mean, we just sat there and played it all night, just blowing things up, and it was like this organic physical function. So every time you blew something up, it was, you know, just different based on the physical parameters, which are always changing. And it was like, you know, like watching a waterfall, waves, you know, you could just watch these things forever. And I just go, wow, man, this is so incredible. And so, you know, I never could have conceived of this. You know, it's like, it's so amazing when sometimes some things happen and they're far beyond your expectations. And there's a lot of it is when you have a good collaboration and you have this exchange of ideas, and not be just, you know, sitting at your desk with the blinders on and you know, working 16 hours a day, but maybe in the wrong direction.
Yeah. And be around people that are like not like you at all.
Yeah.
I think that's the other key.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's like it's easy, you know, like in games, let's say, to only think about games, you know, and only refer to other games and such, and not, you know, and not be around somebody who might be a writer or somebody who might be an oil painter. You're trying to just get a diversity of not just people, but of different talents, you know, because it's very easy for people to just sit from their computer and just zone out, and that's their whole world. And ultimately they end up making games that are just referring to other games, and there's a gazillion of those already.
All right.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is listen to people. I mean, and over the years, the most successful designers and developers, you know, obviously you come in with your preconceived notions, but then listen to everybody and see how things are playing out. Get people to play your game, see how, you know, what they say about it, and have like a super open mind, and realize maybe some of your preconceived notions are maybe not the right way to go, and you kind of broaden, you know, the scope of your input, and it really, and you got to kind of suck up your ego sometimes, you know, where, you know, you just have to really, I think you have to look at the idea and not the person. Don't get attached to, don't put persons and ideas together, just have ideas, you know.
All right. Well, that's a great kind of last note to leave us on. That's all the time we have for tonight. But thank you all for being here. Thank you to Josh, Eugene as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.